Peace and blessings to everyone. I'm looking at this Larry Hoover case, and I've been studying the case for years, and the case seems to me to be extremely faulty and great lack of evidence, and just quite frankly, seems like a setup, right? It seems like a setup from law enforcement at the time, government at the time, to take Larry Hoover off of the streets of Chicago. And so, to me, that was going to happen either two ways. Either Larry Hoover was going to be murdered, or he was going to be framed for murder in order to be removed off the streets of Chicago. So now, February, we're going to be winding back in time. February 26, 1973, Larry Hoover and Andrew Howard supposedly killed a man by the name of William Young. Hoover and Howard both are sentenced to 150 years each, right? The only testimony or the only evidence that the state had as it relates to this case was testimony from one Joshua Shaw. Joshua Shaw testified at a preliminary hearing that he saw Howard and Hoover abduct Young. Right after that, not too long after that, Joshua Shaw was murdered. Okay, so Joshua Shaw didn't get the chance to actually testify at Howard and Hoover's trial. Now, it looks like the perfect setup, right? In the sense that you have to understand back then, we're talking about the 1970s. And in the 1970s, gangs are changing. Gangs are evolving. So we see Jeff Fort, Blackstone Rangers. Jeff Fort is invited to the White House by Richard Nixon. The Black Peace Stones received over $1 million in grants. Larry Hoover and his organization is on the rise as well. And so law enforcement at the time was crooked, and that's been proven. That's been proven. And law enforcement in the time of the 60s and 70s and 80s was a crooked entity. Not all Chicago cops were crooked, but a segment of the Chicago Police Department was definitely crooked. We look at Brother Fred Hampton in his case as it relates to the Chicago Police Department, FBI, and how he was set up and murdered. And we look at John Burge, who at the time was actively torturing African-American men into false confessions. This is a fact. The city of Chicago has paid out millions of dollars to people who were coerced into bogus confessions by the hands of Commander John Burge and his lieutenants within the Chicago Police Department. John Burge was actually found guilty, and families were paid retribution, millions of dollars. And so it's not impossible to think that that same element had a role within Larry Hoover's case, removing him off of the streets totally, completely. Like I said, either he was going to be murdered or sent to jail for life, right? Because that energy, that power that he had to be stripped. It had to be removed. So the only evidence that they have of him murdering, of Larry Hoover and Andrew Howard murdering William Young, is the testimony of Joshua Shaw. And Joshua Shaw, before he can testify at the actual trial, he's murdered. He ends up murdered. He ends up, being killed. And it's the perfect setup if you're someone on the outside saying, I want to remove him, and so I'm going to bring in someone to say they saw him kidnap. They saw Larry Hoover kidnap William Young, and then I'm going to have that person who say he saw Hoover kidnap him killed, right? So that makes Larry Hoover looks even more guilty of a crime that I really don't have evidence to prove. You see what I mean? But the fact that now I can produce and say, well, I have two murders that I still really can't prove because Hoover and Howard They weren't convicted in the murder of Joshua Shaw. So we see that Joshua Shaw was a pawn used by someone. Someone used him as a pawn to use his statement as it relates to William Young being murdered. And then someone disposed of him, removed him, wiped him out, right? Took him out of the total case and out of the equation. To me, it smells like a setup. It's the perfect setup to remove Larry Hoover off of the streets of Chicago. Now, in the 70s, listen, in the 70s, it was a phenomenon that I don't think could be explained within this video. So you have Jeff Fort and his energy. You have Larry Hoover and his energy. You also have a multi-millionaire by the name of Fluky Stokes. And then you have a corrupt segment of the Chicago Police Department that's looking at these black men making so much money legally, receiving grants from the government, and then some, as it relates to Fluky Stokes, making a lot of money illegally. Yet, Fluky Stokes even changed his thing around in that initially he made his money illegally, but then he got into the gambling business, which is legal. He started going to Vegas and gambling and coming back to Chicago, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. And so, you had a crooked police force, not all of them, but a nice amount that said, listen, we have to stop these brothers. You know what I mean? We have to stop these brothers. We have to let them see who's in charge, and that's us. We are the biggest gang. I'm saying that little segment within the police department, John Burge and his guys. We are the biggest gang in the city of Chicago, and those who we feel that's going to challenge us are going to be removed. And either through false confessions, torture, murder, as we see in the case of Brother Fred Hampton, or send you to prison for 150 years, as we see with Brother the Honorable Larry Hoover. So I'm asking that the Justice Department do the right thing under this administration, under President Donald Trump. I know he's not all that in vogue at the moment, but I'm asking that the Justice Department under President Donald Trump, through the influence of Brother Kanye West. I know y'all all tripping on Kanye, whatever. But as it relates to Larry Hoover, I'm asking that the Justice Department, through the influence of Kanye West, take a second look, third, fourth, fifth, sixth look into the life of Larry Hoover, into his case, into his unjust sentencing, 150 years, into the entire case, into the essence and ethos of the times of the 1970s in Chicago. Crooked police officers, black men being set up, false confessions, bogus confidential informants. I'm asking the Justice Department actually take another look and give Larry Hoover a fair trial. Give this man, he deserves a fair trial. Everyone within that case deserves a fair trial. Okay, if we're going to talk about justice, then he definitely deserves some type of justice than to just say, hey, a witness said he saw you and another young man abduct this man, murder him, and guess what? The guy who said he saw you all do this, he was murdered himself. You see what I mean? That's a setup. That's a setup, people. And so I would love if the government could reopen this case, truly look at it, and truly give Larry Hoover and his family justice he deserved. And that is for that man to be pardoned. He needs to be pardoned. He was unjustly incarcerated. He needs to be pardoned. That's really the bottom line, people. And so let's work towards that goal. Peace. I'm out.